Welcome back to Conflict of Interest, and we're glad to have US politics expert Charles Richardson here with us this evening. Now, I believe you were in Washington for the inauguration.
I was. Wonderful experience. Bitterly cold,
yes.
But just tremendous atmosphere. A crowd of 2 million people is something to see.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like for the most part he spoke in front of some big crowds in Europe, and someone was saying it brought to mind the rallies of the election campaign in some parts.
Well, yeah, I think that's right. He is a great orator. There's no doubt about that. That is one of his real strengths, and you know, it would be silly not to take advantage of that. So I don't think you can criticise him for taking the opportunity to address crowds when he can, and contribute to that what you were talking about before, the warming of America's image in the rest of the world, particularly in Europe.
How does that play domestically when Americans see the reception that he gets in Europe?
I think most people see that as a positive, that he's improving America's standing, and you know it reflects well on the country at large if the president is liked overseas.
The McCain campaign tried to make something of that initially, didn't
they?
They tried to suggest that they tried the John Kerry approach.
They did. It's like, well, in the previous election, you know, John Kerry virtually had to apologise for being able to speak French.
Yeah. Oh, he looked French, Charles.
That's right, he looked French. That sort of bouffant hair.
Yes, and a long face.
It's this. There is definitely a strain of isolationism in American politics, but I don't think that represents the majority opinion.
There is a desire to be liked by Americans, isn't there?
Yes.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that. And just on that point, I was stunned by a figure in a Washington Post poll out, I think, last week, which says that 81% of Americans want Obama to improve relations with the Muslim world.
Yeah.
I mean, no, but I've got two questions about that for you. Two questions about that. Firstly, what do you think that says about the American? Has the American body politic changed? And two, what do you think is the essence of improving relations with the Muslim world? What can Obama achieve?
Well, I think first of all, there's very much a broad recognition, you know, that goes across parties within America that there's a problem about relations with the Muslim world, and so I think you can get a bipartisan consensus that something needs to be done about that. Now, when it comes to what needs to be done, that's much more difficult to get agreement. Obama's position clearly is that it's time for negotiation. It's time to reach out and talk to countries like Iran and Syria, and not that it's a Muslim country, but it came up in the news this morning, to talk to Cuba. He's winding back sanctions against Cuba. And I mean, that's the platform that he was elected on. But
has the American view of the world changed, or did Bush just get it really wrong?
Well, the Bush strategy has been tried and didn't work very well. Yeah. So I think...
and you think Americans perceive that that's the case and shifted?
I think the majority does. There's still a substantial minority that you know, is unwilling to see any good in Obama, and will oppose pretty much everything he does. But as the election demonstrated, those people are not the majority.
And would it be fair to say that the Obama administration's goals, foreign policy goals, are essentially the same? They're broad goals as the Bush administration. It's just that their approach is radically different.
Yes, I think that's right. That every administration has pretty much the same goals. That they want America to be safe and prosperous and well respected. They want, you know, freedom and democracy to flourish in the world. The question is how you go about those things, and Obama has a different view about that to the one that Bush and Cheney did.
Is there a risk? One of the criticisms by the Conservatives, and I think this might have some validity, Charles, is that for example, in his going to Turkey and overtly encouraging the Europeans to accept Turkey as a member of the EU, he's guilty of meddling in EU affairs, because that is a very problematic issue, particularly for France.
Well, it is, but it's also long-standing American policy. I mean, that was Bush's view as well, that Turkey should be in the EU. Now, Obama maybe has been a little bit more explicit about it.
Should he have used a megaphone? Should he have used a megaphone?
Well, his agenda is trying to reach out to the Muslim world and get the message across to them that they are not the enemy, that there is no inherent conflict between the West and the Muslim world. And Turkey's acceptance into the EU would be a very major step forward on that goal. So, yeah, I think it's reasonable. As you say, the French have got a bit of a bee in their bonnet about that, but they seem to cope. I mean, Nicolas Sarkozy sort of made it clear that he disagreed, but not that it would in any way spoil his relations with America. Is
there a risk that the other criticism is that there's a risk that Obama, in a sense, is relying on, we talked about it before the break, charm offensive, celebrity status to get results. And at the end of the day, that only goes so far. That when it comes to the hard yards of dealing with Iran, you've got to be much tougher.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, but also at the moment there's no reason to think Obama doesn't realise that. I think that you reach a point where we've been trying the non-diplomatic route, and as I said, it hasn't been working very well. Let's try negotiation. Let's assume that these countries are acting in good faith and see what happens. There's always time to use the big stick later if it's necessary. But if
Obama pledged to lead by example on this trip, but that kind of diplomatic approach can only take you so far. The NATO summit, for example, the results from that were quite disappointing, given that he didn't push it too strongly, but he did talk about the fact that America could not act alone in Afghanistan. But I think European countries only managed to cobble together about 5,000 troops, and of that about 3,000 of them are going to be merely observers during the elections.
Yes, he clearly wasn't very successful at getting a greater commitment there. But there's a question about how effective any number of troops are going to be in Afghanistan. I think Obama recognised that ultimately a political solution is going to be necessary there, and at most the military presence is just putting some pressure towards that rather than being a solution in itself.
I think it compares to about 21,000 more troops from the US.
Yes,
but he didn't push the point at all. He maintained a very softly approach on this trip.
He's only been in office for less than 3 months, so I think it's unrealistic to expect him to be pushing too hard too fast. He's still establishing himself and really needs to focus most of all on changing the perceptions, changing America's image in the world, and the hope is that other things will flow from that.
So there is a perception that he's the Jesus president, but you're right. He has only been in office for 3 months. So let's give the guy a break.
We've got it. That's right. We've got to head to a break shortly, but I just want to give you one more quote from. This is from James Walsh, who writes for one of the conservative websites, one of the slightly more mainstream ones in the US, Charles. Makes this point. He says that effectively this trip was all about spin. He says Washington spin at its best. The Obama administration tends to believe its own press clippings. The world is not in lockstep with the president's stimulus plans or his Afghan plans or his bailout plans or his nuclear weapons control plans.
The presidency is always about spin because it's that sort of office. It's a figurehead position as far as the rest of the world is concerned. So to dismiss the image things as just spin and therefore not important, I think is missing the point of what the presidency does. I also can't help finding it fascinating about the mention about the conservative commentary that when there was a Republican president,
There was no spin.
Anyone in Australia who attacked the Republican president was immediately accused of being anti-American.
That's right.
But Australian Conservatives now are getting stuck into Obama freely.
Yeah.
Well, nobody throws it back at them.
But hypocrisy and names like Janet Albrechtsen go together. They just go together.
Now, I didn't mention any names.
Well, I will. These people have got to be identified, and they've got to be sought out. We're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to keep you here, Charles, because we like having you on, and you entertain us. When we come back, we're going to explore a little further what the Obama administration is going to do now about issues like Iran, and particularly his proposals in relation to nuclear weapons.